Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Zabel of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. Now in this video, I'm going to be continuing through the mini-series we've got here on reasons to leave the Missouri Synod. Now, this was originally Pastor Magnus Sorensen's series. He's done two regarding the Missouri Synod and Church Fellowship, and he'll probably do some more in the future of other reasons why you should leave the Missouri Synod. Now, the reason why I'm doing this video as part of this series instead of Pastor Magnus doing it is just because I was going to do a video on this topic just more broadly in general, but when I found out that the Missouri Synod specifically holds to this particular error that we're going to discuss in this video, I thought I might as well do this as part of the series Reasons to Leave Missouri Synod, because I do believe that this is a reason why confessional Lutherans who subscribe to the Book of Concord need to leave the Missouri Synod and seek fellowship with more confessional Lutheran churches. And so then, what is this particular issue that we need to discuss? And this is the heresy that the Antichrist can change from being the Pope. And if people are confused as to what exactly that means, let me explain. The Lutheran confessions teach that the Pope, not any specific individual Pope, but the papal office, is the fulfillment of the biblical predictions of the Antichrist. That the Pope or papal office, if I just want to be more accurate, is the revealed Antichrist from Scripture. Now, Scripture talks about Antichrists. These are, false teachers that will emerge within the church. So the Scriptures do talk about different Antichrists. But there is also in Scripture this specific Antichrist. In the epistle of John, in the first epistle of John, he talks about both Antichrists, plural, and the Antichrist, singular. Now, as I said, the Antichrist, singular, is not one individual pope, but it is the papal office. So it's not one individual, but it is one thing. There is the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the one thing that will be the Antichrist. This is also called the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians. Now, the Lutheran Church confesses that the Pope is the Antichrist, not just an Antichrist, as Luther says in the small coelc-atc, and this is one of the most important confessions from the Lutheran Confession on this topic that I'll bring up. Luther says in Article 4 of Part 2 of the small coelc-atc, lines 10 and following, "This business shows overwhelming that he is the true end times Antichrist." Now that's the Cobb and Wengert translation. The old Triglotta translation just said he is the very Antichrist. The literal German, Luther uses two terms here. He refers to the Pope as the End Christ, literally the end times Christ, and also the Werde Christ, or as we'd say in English, Antichrist. So Luther does teach that the Pope is the Antichrist, and not just an Antichrist, but the specific, revealed, end times Antichrist. Now, as Lutherans who are millennialists, we believe we are already in the end times. That, as Peter confesses at the day of Pentecost, that Pentecost was a fulfillment of the prophecy in Joel, and Joel says that this would take place in the last times. So the last times, the end times we are in now, since the beginning of Pentecost up until the return of Christ. And Luther says that this end times Christ, who will be revealed, as Scripture promises us, is the Pope, or the papal office. Luther goes on to say that this is what Paul means when he says that there is one who will set himself over God and against God. He adds that the Turks and the Tartars, so essentially Muslims, they are enemies of Christ, but they are not the Antichrist. So we could say maybe they're Antichrists, but they're not the Antichrist. And so there are two things to establish here. One, the Lutheran confessions confess that the Pope is the Antichrist. Two, the Lutheran confessions confess and teach that there is one revealment of the end times Antichrist, which is the Pope. So it's not like there's going to be different types of Antichrist. It's not like it's the Pope now and maybe it'll be Islam later, or it's the Pope now and maybe it'll be like some secular government later. No, there is one Antichrist, the Antichrist. Like I said, there are different Antichrists, and so Muslims or other false teachers or the charismatics or any of these could be Antichrists, but they are not the one specific Antichrist which Scripture talks about and which Thessalonians Paul refers to as the man of lawlessness. So, what then is the issue with the Missouri Synod? Well, if we go to the Missouri Synod's brief doctrinal statement from 1932, it says this regarding the Antichrist. As to the Antichrist, we teach that the prophecies of Holy Scripture concerning the Antichrist, and here it quotes 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3 to 12 and 1 John chapter 2 verse 18, have been fulfilled in the Pope of Rome and his dominion. All the features of the Antichrist, as drawn in these prophecies, including the most abominable and horrible ones, for example, that the Antichrist sitteth in the temple of God as God, 2 Thessalonians 2:4, that he anathematizes the very heart of the gospel of Christ, that is, the doctrine of the forgiveness of sins by grace alone, for Christ's sake alone, through faith alone, without any merit or worthiness in man, see Romans 3:20-28 and Galatians 2:16, that he recognizes only those as members of the Christian church who bow to his authority, and that, like a deluge, he has inundated the whole church with his anti-Christian doctrine till God revealed him through the Reformation. These very features are the outstanding characteristics of the Antichrist. Hence we subscribe to the statement of our confessions that the Pope is the very Antichrist. And you might say, well, Pastor Jake, what's wrong with that statement? And my answer is nothing. I have no problem with that statement. I fully agree with what the Missouri Synod confessed back in 1932. I have no issue with that statement. It says that the Antichrist is the specific one Antichrist. The Pope is the very true end times Antichrist. The Pope is the revealed Antichrist. The Pope is the very Antichrist. All of this I fully agree with. I have no problem with that. And so if the Missouri Synod was like it was back in 1932, this would not be an issue. The issue emerges in the modern times. So if you go to the Missouri Synod's frequently asked questions part on their doctrinal positions, and I will have links to these in the description of this episode below, there is a question that is sent in to the Missouri Synod, and it reads, as a Methodist living in a new town, I have found a local LCMS church where I feel comfortable and fed. Seeking information, I have looked over the pages on the net and have developed some questions. The connection between the Antichrist and Pope are unclear to me. Do you believe the Pope is the only enemy? Now, the Missouri Synod then provides an answer to this particular question. And it reads, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod does not teach, nor has it ever taught, that any individual pope as a person is to be identified with the Antichrist. The historic view of the LCMS on the Antichrist is summarized as followed by the Synod's Theological Commission. So here in this frequently asked questions, it is referencing the Synodical Theological Commission's answer to the Missouri Synod's position on the Antichrist. And so the following then is the position of the Missouri Synod, and it reads as follows. The New Testament predicts that the church throughout its history will witness many antichrists. Matthew 24:5 and verses 23 to 24, Mark 13 verse 6 and verses 21 to 22, Luke 21 verse 8, 1 John 2:18 and verse 2, and chapter 4 verse 3, and 2 John verse 7. All false teachers who teach contrary to Christ's word are opponents of Christ, and insofar as they do are antichrists. However, the scripture also teaches that there is one climactic antichrist. Daniel 7:8, 11 and 20 to 21 and 24 to 25, also chapter 11 verses 36 to 45, 2 Thessalonians 2:1, 1 John 2:18 and 4:3, and Revelations chapter 17 to chapter 18. Concerning the historical identification of the Antichrist, we affirm the Lutheran Confession's identification of the Antichrist with the office of the papacy, whose official claims continue to correspond to the scriptural marks listed above. It is important, however, that we observe the distinction which the Lutheran Confessions made between the office of the Pope, papacy, and the individual men who fill that office. The latter could be Christians themselves. We do not presume to judge any person's heart. Now, so far, no problem. I'm fully in agreement with what the Missouri Synod has said so far, that there is a particular climactic antichrist who is distinguished as something different to the multiple antichrists who are just pretty much any false teacher. There is also this confession there for Missouri Synod that it is not any individual pope who is the Antichrist, but that it is the specific office of the papacy that is the Antichrist. No problem so far. It's the final line that is about to come that I have an issue with, and for why I think people should leave the Missouri Synod. And the final line says this: also, we acknowledge the possibility that the historical form of the Antichrist could change. Of course, in that case, another identified by these marks would arise. So here, the Missouri Synod says, look, we believe the Pope is the Antichrist, but it could change. It could also be somebody else at some other time. And that teaching is just not Lutheran. It's contrary to the Lutheran Confessions, where Luther says he is the very end times Antichrist. If it could be someone else, then the Pope can't be the climactic Antichrist, this is the biggest issue with the Missouri Synod statement. It is simply illogical and contradictory. You cannot say that there are many antichrists who are not the Antichrist, and there is specifically one Antichrist who is going to be the one specific Antichrist, but then he could change to be something different. Well, if he changes to be something different, then it's no longer the one Antichrist. So if we could say the Pope is an Antichrist, and then later it changes to be maybe the Pentecostals are their Antichrist, then it's no longer the Antichrist. Because that would now be two different antichrists. The Pope was an antichrist, now the Pentecostals are an antichrist. That's two different antichrists, which would mean they are not the one revealed specific end times antichrist, but that they are two different types of antichrists, plural, which the Missouri Synod in its statement said earlier are two distinct different things. There are the different antichrists, and then there is the one specific antichrist. And if that specific antichrist can change, then he's not the specific antichrist. He would just be one of many antichrists. And so the statement is illogical and contradictory. And because this is now the official teaching of the Missouri Synod, they actually no longer teach that the Pope is the end times Antichrist. They might say the Pope is the Antichrist, but they also think the Pope can change, which means they do not agree with Luther's statement here in the small court articles that the Pope is the very true end times Antichrist. He is the very end Christ Antichrist. So either the Pope is the one single revealed end times Antichrist, or he isn't. This idea that he could change defeats the purpose of him being the one specific revealed Antichrist. Luther says that this is the revealed Antichrist who is the fulfillment of this scriptural prophecy. And this is the teaching of the Lutheran confessions. If you don't agree with that statement, then you are not a confessional Lutheran. If you think that the Antichrist can change from being the Pope to being something else, then you are not a confessional Lutheran. Therefore, the Missouri Synod in its modern form is not a confessional Lutheran church body. Yes, back in 1932, when they put out their brief doctrinal statement, the Missouri Synod was a confessional Lutheran church body, and that their statement on the Antichrist back in 1932 is in agreement with the Lutheran confessions, and I would have no problem subscribing to that statement. But this modern statement that says that the Pope, it could be the Antichrist today, and then tomorrow the Antichrist could be somebody else, that is contrary to the teachings of the Lutheran confessions, and it is just an illogical, contradictory statement that does also not agree with Scripture. Because Scripture does not teach that the Antichrist can change. As the Missouri Synod says in their own statement, and this is not the old statement but the new statement, they said that Scripture teaches that there is one climactic Antichrist. That there is one fulfillment of these prophecies, and that fulfillment is in the office of the papacy. If the fulfillment can change to be something else, then there is no longer one fulfillment. And so you see here that Missouri Synod not only contradicts themselves in their statement, but they then would be teaching contrary to Scripture. There is one fulfillment. If that fulfillment is able to change, then it is not one fulfillment but multiple fulfillments. So such a statement is contradictory. But since Missouri Synod has confessed that Scripture teaches that there is one fulfillment, for them then to say that there are the possibility of multiple fulfillments is contrary to the teaching of Scripture. Therefore, the Missouri Synod, in their modern statement on the Antichrist, is contrary not only to the Lutheran confessions, but also to Scripture. Therefore, I would urge all members of the Missouri Synod to either first raise your objections to this, bring it up to some synodical meeting and say, we need to change this statement and remove this heterodox statement that says the Antichrist can change from being the papacy to being something else. You need to reject that statement. You need to bring it up and make sure the Missouri Synod rejects and removes that statement. And if they won't, then you need to leave the Missouri Synod because they are a heterodox church body, and you need to seek out a confessional Lutheran church body that says that the Pope is the very end times Antichrist, as we confess in our Lutheran confessions. Now, I'm not saying you should necessarily join the coelc. You know, you may not agree with all the teachings of the coelc, and so there'd be no point you trying to join us. But you should at least go and join a church that confesses the true confessional Lutheran doctrine that the Pope is the Antichrist. Now, I don't know the confessions of every other Lutheran synod there is out there on the doctrine of the Antichrist. I know some, I don't know all of them. What I can say is what the coelc confesses. And in the coelc quick guide, which is a small little document we put together of just brief coelc statements, statement number 69 says that we the coelc, reject the idea that while the Pope has been revealed as the man of sin prophesied in 2 Thessalonians 2, that some other figure might be the man of sin at the return of Christ. So we reject the idea that anyone else other than the Pope could be the specific end times Antichrist. And that's pretty much my video on this topic. I have done several videos on this topic of the papacy being the Antichrist. I would encourage you to go check out those videos. In those videos, I go into more in-depth detail into what the Scripture teach, what does the Lutheran confessions teach, what does the Catholic Church say about himself, why do we teach that it's not an individual but the office. I've covered those topics in several other videos on this idea of the Antichrist. So I'd recommend you go and you check out those videos if you'd like any more information on this topic. Otherwise, I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.